Alexander the Great took over the world. That isn't some kind of clickbait hyperbole. I mean, he took over the world. He won every battle, he claimed every city, he overcame every obstacle. Alexander III of Macedon, or Alexander the Great for short, built a resume of conquests that no one has since been able to top. He went undefeated in battle. He created the greatest empire in human history. He covered over 2 million square miles of territory. He campaigned around the world for 12 years. He founded over 20 cities. He changed the language that people spoke. He made up tactics on the fly that are still taught today in military academies. He became the benchmark for all military leaders to compare themselves to. So how did he do it? Alexander the Great learned from the best. His teacher, Aristotle. Yeah, that Aristotle. If you know who Aristotle is, and you know that he's important and famous, but don't really know why, or just need a reminder, just know that Aristotle discovered science. His teaching on science, philosophy, and the understanding of the world created a foundation for Alex the Great to build his own ideas and life on. His opinions about existence and advanced theories that would later influence his political reign. But that's beside the point. We're not talking about Alexander the humble Stoic here. This is Alexander the Great. He's about to take over the world, so he begins by reading about great rulers. Alexander the Great took the most inspiration from Cyrus the Great, no relation. Reading Xenophon's Cyropedia, Alex the Great learned about Cyrus' abilities as a hero in battle and as a statesman in his government. Alex the Great knew that Cyrus built the largest empire in human history up to that point. Cyrus created the first Persian Empire. He discovered new military strategies and invented new concepts of political and philosophical theory. Cyrus's successor was Darius. You'll meet him later. Alex the Great kept studying from Aristotle and kept reading in preparation for one day taking up the throne. But Alex the Great made one huge mistake. He ruined his father's wedding. Everything was going just fine at the event when Alexander's uncle-in-law made a big show about how excited he was for Philip II to have another child with his then wife, Cleopatra, who would take up the throne. Alex the Great did what anyone would do. He threw a cup at his in-law's head. Philip, trying to step in, shot up from his chair to scold his son, who tripped immediately, probably from being too drunk. As legend goes, Alex the Great shot back an insult. See there, the man who makes preparations to pass out of Europe into Asia, overturned in passing from one seat to another. Needless to say, this didn't go over too well. Alex the Great left the city soon after, by exile from his father. The trip lasted for about 6 months, after which Alex the Great journeyed back home, making amends with his father. A year later, Philip died. His head bodyguard killed him. The bodyguard was then put to death. The head nobles of the Macedonian army promoted Alex the Great on the spot. He was only 20 years old. Alex the Great started his reign of the Macedonian Empire by immediately taking over the Balkans. But before he could do that, he needed to eliminate his enemies, one by one. He killed his cousin, executed his other rivals, and created a game plan for taking over the rest of his father's kingdom. He strengthened his northern borders and began his campaign around modern-day Greece. But Alex the Great was not met with universal approval. In the beginning of his journey, he stomped out rebellions from the Thebians and the Athenians. When he kept moving south, the city of Thebes fought back again. This was ineffective. Alex the Great burned the city to the ground. Athens got the message, so the rest of the country submitted to Alex the Great. After he took over Thebes, Alex the Great took the next logical step, conquering all of Asia. Much like a real-life game of Risk, he continued to increase his presence on the game board. His enemy was known as the Achaemenid Persian Empire. We already know that Alex the Great never lost a battle, so I'll spare you the details. The only suspense here is not whether Alex the Great is going to win. It's it's from how badly the other guy is going to lose. Alex the Great had enemies who outnumbered him for most of his battles. He didn't win by numbers. He won with raw ambition and combat ability. He outsmarted his opponents by using bold strategies, by doing what other armies weren't willing to try and didn't know how to do. He used a combination of tightly packed ground soldiers and cavalry, horseback riders, to outmaneuver the enemy on the ground. He relied on the loyalty of his army and his constant, rigorous training to overcome the odds. Alex the Great continued Philip II's project to expand into Asia by throwing his spear into the soil. He declared at that moment that he would take over the entire landmass. Unlike his father, who preferred to be diplomatic at times, Alex the Great was eager to fight and accepted Asia as a gift from the gods. But there was more to his conquest than just battles. When Alex the Great invaded the Phrygian capital of Gordium, he came across an ancient monument known as the Gordian Knot. The Gordian Knot was tied from a physical rope to be so complex and so difficult to untangle that no man could undo it. The knot stood as a testament to the strength of the Asian continent. Legend has it, the man who could untie the knot would become the king of all of Asia. So when he came across the legendary Gordian Knot, Alex the Great became the first to undo it. But Alex the Great did not bow down to untie the strands of fate. He slashed through the knot with his sword and kept moving. As the prophecy foretold, Alex the Great managed to conquer all of Asia. But the Asian territories were not enough. Next came Syria. When he bested the significantly larger Syrian army, Alex the Great gave no mercy. Darius, the Syrian king up until then, and that guy from earlier who took over from Cyrus the Great, pleaded for his life. Darius tried to negotiate by offering Alexander territory and riches in order to spare his family. Alexander replied only by stating that he was no longer in a position to make demands. It was Alex the Great who ruled the continent. He decided the divisions of territory, so Darius fled, so Alex the Great claimed another spot on the board. But Syria wasn't enough. Alex the Great needed Egypt. He was able to overtake most of the nation without much trouble, but Gaza and the military stronghold within gave him a real problem. The enemy built a fort on top of a steep hill, armored with more men and better weapons. The Macedonian siege leaders told Alex the Great that taking over the base would be impossible. That only made Alex the Great try harder. It took 3 attempts, but the army overtook Gaza and continued the conquest. While in Egypt, Alex the Great revamped the nation's taxation system, bolstered the military, but he kept the Egyptian religion intact. Instead of trying to overthrow Egyptian culture, much like the other legs of his journey, Alex the Great became a legitimate ruler by offering sacrifices to the Egyptian gods. The oracle Amun-Ra proclaimed him as the son of the Egyptian god Amun. For the rest of his life, he took on Zeus Amun as his father. Given his record, him being the son of a god doesn't seem too far-fetched. So, as Alex the Great kept taking over Egypt, he chased that loser Darius from earlier through the Persian continent. He had one of his officials stab the other emperor to death, at which point Alex the Great officially ended the Persian Empire. Alex the Great spent the next chunk of time touring over Asia and building new cities across his empire. And that's how this story ends, with a peaceful rule over the giant stretch of modern-day Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa. Okay, fine. We both know that isn't true. Having the greatest empire in the world was not enough. Next, he needed to take over India. But first, Alex the Great took on a couple side projects. He created a central government, changed the monetary system a bit, and he married his first wife. On his way to taking over India, Alex the Great created an alliance with the ruler of Taxila, Ambi. This gave Alex the Great significantly more troops and firepower. However, it wasn't smooth sailing from there. During their trip through India, Alex the Great hurt his ankle pretty bad. This upset Alex the Great. According to one of his generals, not only did Alexander the Great slaughter the entire population of the town he was in, but also he reduced the buildings to rubble. Alex the Great continued by defeating the great King Porus, who Alex the Great respected as an ally due to the king's bravery and willingness to surrender. But if you ever plan on taking over India in the year circa 323 BC, there's one big problem you should know about: the Ganges River. It's here at the Ganges River where our story takes an unexpected turn. It's here where our hero faces a colossal waterway 600 feet deep. And for the first time in our journey, someone is able to convince Alex the Great to not do something. Alex the Great had a general, Conus, who begged and pleaded with him to stop marching and to go home for the time being. And you know what? The Macedonian king's army finally gave up. And who can blame them? They stared at the edge of the world, and the edge of the world stared back. Alex the Great and his army faced 80,000 horsemen, 200,000 men on foot, 8,000 chariots, and 6,000 war elephants across the river. The men longed again to see their parents, their wives, and their children, and they longed to go back home. So that's what they did. They turned around and they marched back home. Alex the Great suffered another near-death injury of an arrow piercing his chest and his lung, yet this did not kill him. He did not stop. He kept going. He took his men through a harsher path than before, going straight through the Gedrosian desert on the way back. Many men died. Though the army sustained many casualties, they made it back to Persia. Feeling generous, Alex the Great thanked his troops by paying off their debts and offering to send the wounded and elderly soldiers back to Macedon. But his troops didn't understand. The men had no intention of taking the easy way out. Not now. Not at this point. The soldiers acted out their tantrums and threw a mutiny. Alex the Great, unable to negotiate and to get his men to settle down, offered to promote them instead. The soldiers, realizing what they had done, begged for forgiveness, which Alex the Great granted. Alex the Great had a massive celebration for thousands of his soldiers, thus capping off the military exploits of Alex the Great. Oh, but wait, there's more. Remember that guy Cyrus from earlier? Yeah. Alex the Great didn't get to meet Cyrus, what with Cyrus being dead at that point and all, but he did get to do the next best thing. When Alex the Great arrived back in Persia, he learned that the tomb of Cyrus had been destroyed by degenerate guards. Alex the Great being Alex the Great, he promptly had the guards killed. After the execution, he ordered his chief architect to redecorate the tomb inside and out, finally paying tribute to the inspiration who led him down the path of global domination. Then he died. Alex the Great passed away less than 2 weeks after the Cyrus incident. Accounts differ as to what killed Alex the Great. Some say that it was the wine from massive post-India banquets that he held. Others think that it was his sickness, possibly resulting from his injuries. Some even wonder if foul play was involved. That isn't unlikely either, given the string of assassinations taking place in Macedonia at the time. But the point is, no one knows. We'll never truly know the answers to mysteries that happened 25 years ago, let alone 2,500. But if you ask me, I think an illness is what did him in. There's not a man who could defeat him in battle. No soldier could slay him, no cut could kill him, no wound could even warrant a concern. If you ask me, it would need to be an act of God's. Only a supernatural force could bring down a once-in-a-history figure like Alex the Great. Alex the Great is the Platonic ideal of the philosopher king. What does this mean? Well, Platonic ideal is kind of a loaded term. It basically means that something is the perfect image of an idea. He is the best example we have of this philosopher king concept. And what does that mean? Well, A philosopher king is a hypothetical ruler who has equal parts political knowledge and philosophical backing. Alex the Great turned the philosopher king concept from Plato's theory into a reality. He became a ruler of great power, a leader of great strategy, an expert of great thought, and he built cities from the ground up. He invented new systems and distribution networks to make and collect capital. Most importantly, he understood power. Shortly before his death, Alexander the Great was asked who would succeed in his kingdom. "To the strongest," replied Alexander the Great. But no one could live up to the task of succeeding him. When Alex the Great died, his empire split apart. No one could keep it together, and certainly no one was willing to carry out the Macedonian king's grand plans. Alexander the Great gave written orders to his subordinates to carry out, but they were deemed too unnecessary and too bold. We both know what that means. That just means everyone was too scared. Deep down, they knew they had no chance of carrying out the plans of someone as insane and monumental as Alex the Great. So what were these plans? Well, he ordered the construction of 1,000 ships, longer than the Triremes, harbors and roads across the African coast all the way to the Pillars of Hercules, so they could launch an invasion of Carthage and the Western Mediterranean. He ordered new temples in Delos, Delphi, Dodona, Dium, Amphipolis, and the biggest temple at Athens in Troy. Following the building of temples, the army would then begin a conquest of Arabia and exploration into the African continent, thus completing true total world domination. Alexander the Great envisioned a society way too far ahead of his time. He not only demanded the conquest and the building of monuments, and the building of cities all around the world, he ordered the creation of urban cities out of collections of small settlements. He ordered that populations around the world, from Asia to Europe, be mixed around and shuffled so that different people could see different parts of the world and be united in friendship. Since then, we've built the cities. But while the idea of permanently intermixing cultures around the world is not exactly underway, the advent of convenient travel and technological globalization has led us into an age of greater connectivity and understanding. Even if we aren't a true global community, we're working on beginning to understand each other 2,500 years later. Maybe 2,500 years from now, we will have moved further from war and closer to people understanding each other. Oh, and he also ordered the construction of massive pyramids to rival the greatest pyramids of Egypt. So there's that. Can you imagine, just for one moment, what it might feel like to know that you are truly, literally, and without question, unstoppable? What does the view look like from the top of the mountain? How in the world do you respond to a one-liner like that? I have absolutely no clue what I would say to the man who conquered for the sake of conquering. Alex the Great dominated without a care in the world. Not for his people, not for himself, not for his legacy. He just did it for the sake of following his destiny. He bent the world to his will. He spent 10 years just starting to shape the world into his image. When Alex the Great sat on the throne of Darius, you remember, the guy from earlier who he stomped on, he found that the throne was too big. Since his feet could not touch the ground, his servants lifted a table beneath his feet. I think, in a way, Alex the Great knew who he was. This is just my speculation, but I think that without asking, he sat on that throne, and he sat on the throne of the world itself and made the table to fit beneath his feet. We are not here today to discuss the morality of the Macedonian Empire. That would be silly. If we look back at this story with our modern ethics, none of it holds up. The legend of Alexander the Great does hold up. When his enemies would attempt to use new tactics against him, Alex the Great didn't care. He made up counterplay on the fly. He would reroute his troops into new pattern to overwhelm his opponent's weak points. He would use his new tools and unexpected ways to disrupt enemy plans. but we are not here to discuss Alexander the Innovator. So, what makes Alexander the Great so great? Alexander the Great adored his father. He aspired to conquer like Philip, and he believed so deeply that he was given a destiny by the gods higher than anybody else. I think he truly believed that. Alexander the Great had one unshakable dream: to take over the world, just like his dad and just like Cyrus each tried to do. Alexander the Great knew exactly what he was and what he was destined to accomplish, and he believed with all of his heart that no one could stop him. He carried boundless ambition. But it wasn't just the idea that made him great. It was the fact that he carried it out until his life was cut short. So, that's where this really ends. Alexander the Great is arguably the greatest ruler who ever lived. He's not the best, not the brightest, not the strongest, and not the longest. He did what no one else had ever done before. He did what no one else was able to do, and he did what no one can do again. What makes Alexander the Great so great is that he really did change the world. He took what he wanted to do, and he tilted the angle in which history is aligned. He put new ideas into practice that we just take for granted, ideas that still affect us today. Not many people have done that. So, I wanted to take a bit of your time today to share the story of Alexander the Great. I hope we can at least walk away from here knowing who Alexander the Great was, what he did, and why that made him so great. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.